Welcome back. This is the second part of our Wildcat Wellness lesson. This is our second step lesson. And this one is all about reframing unhelpful thoughts. And remember that very first week we started this, we talked about managing our emotions, which are those very strong feelings that we might have, like anger, frustration, and how sometimes that we make unhealthy or unwise decisions out of that emotion if we don't learn how to manage our emotions. So this lesson is all about reframing unhelpful thoughts. So you guys are going to learn in this lesson how to interpret and reframe unhelpful thoughts. So I know you know how to analyze, and I know you know how to predict. These are skills that I know you're being taught. So if we were to break this down, what would be some key words that you would want to make sure you understood in order to understand this lesson? Because what you're going to learn today can really be life-changing if you apply these methods and techniques. I would say interrupt. I think we all know how to interrupt. I think we all know that that means to stop the flow, to interrupt it. I think we all know what that means. And then this word reframe. We're going to talk a lot more about reframing, but basically it's looking at a situation or thoughts from a different perspective. And then what are unhelpful thoughts? Those are those thoughts that do not benefit us in any way. We all have them. I'm going to be honest. I know I have them. I'm sure your teacher has them. We all have those unhelpful thoughts. And those, out of those unhelpful thoughts, some behaviors that could lead to some negative behaviors that might not be in our best interest. All right, so in our warm-up, I want you to imagine that this is happening to you. You just got settled into class when you realize the pencil you put on your desk is missing. What's one helpful and unhelpful thought you could have about this situation? And those of you who are learning remotely, you guys can please put in the chat. We want to hear from you as a class. I'm just going to tell you, I went into the reading classes. I just finished that up, and it was so good to hear from you and to get your participation. So this might be a good time for you guys to participate in this lesson. So what's one helpful thought and one unhelpful thought that you could have about this situation? Okay, anybody ever been in a really bad storm and it just seems to keep getting louder and louder and scarier and scarier? Well, that's similar to how our emotions are if we don't learn how to manage them and if we don't bring them into check. I call it a cycle, and how to interrupt this cycle. So, and what are some things that you can do to interrupt this cycle? Because if we learn how to do this, we're going to have a much better chance of staying out of trouble, of avoiding those situations that lead to our phones getting taken away from our families, or from getting in trouble with our teacher, or, you know, I don't know, sometimes you just might feel like I'm constantly getting hassled. What's going on? Well, it might be that you're caught up in this cycle. So look this over and see if any of this seems familiar to you. Look up here at the top. This is where it starts. You have that strong emotion, and that leads to the unhelpful thought. And then that could lead to a negative decision coming out of that unhelpful thought. And then that moves into an even stronger emotion. You see how the sun just disappears and it goes into rain, and then eventually moves into lightning bolts. So think about that and talk about it as a class. If this has ever happened to you, or you can say it's happened to somebody that you know. And what are some ways that you think, once you've done this, process this, and you please pause the video so you as a class with the virtual learners and the face-to-face students process this. And then we're going to come up with some possible ideas of how you can interrupt this cycle. So here's some possible ideas, and we're going to see if they match the ones that you guys came up with. First one, managing your emotion. Remember, we talked about calming down. That's where you take those deep breaths. I don't know if you remember us talking about the starfish or the mountain pose. Just some, or counting, just simply counting back from 10. That's a real helpful way to just calm yourself down. So, which what happens is when you do this, when you calm yourself down, remember, and I know you've learned this in probably your science and your reading classes, shout out people. I know you're teaching these strategies. You learn that when we manage our emotions, our strong emotions, our amygdala turns our feeling alarms down. We're all in alarm. We're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. We're all hyped up. So it calms us down to where we can start to think. And that frontal lobe, our cortex, has time to catch up and to think. And that's when you have that time to stop and think, that's when you can catch that unhelpful thought and you can change it. So this is how I'm going to give you a method, a strategy on how to interrupt the cycle. And remember, that cycle is what we just talked about. The sun shining, an event happens, your emotion, then it moves into a thunderstorm, and sometimes you can feel like a hurricane or a tornado. So how to interrupt the cycle. So you're going to first use an emotion management strategy. That's like the deep breathing that we just talked about. And then you're going to reframe that unhelpful thought into a more helpful thought. And we're going to talk about how to do this. So strategies for managing emotions. This is that first step. The very first step is how to manage your emotions. And what strategies have we already learned in our second step, our Wildcat Wellness lessons? What have we learned? So go ahead and talk about ways that we've learned. So now I want you to come up with other ways maybe to possibly calm down. So let's see what you guys come up with. And those at home, remember, you're a part of this class. We want to hear from everybody. So let's see what you came up with. The slow breathing, walking away, that's always a good one, in the counting. Very helpful. Strategies for managing that emotion so you can calm down and you can move into thinking phase where you're more likely to make a beneficial or a helpful decision. So reframing unhelpful thoughts. We've talked a lot about this, but we're going to give you a really good visual. So to reframe means to look at the situation or thoughts from a different perspective. So in this picture, what do you see? You see a reflection of, or a picture of rain. It looks kind of cold, actually. So it kind of makes you feel some kind of way. Well, if we reframe it, you can say, well, actually, it's sunny. So you can see it's a different perspective, and you might have some different emotions. Personally, I kind of like both weathers. I kind of see the advantages of rain and also see, but if I had to preference, I would definitely tell you I love sun. It was a beautiful blue sky day. It just makes me feel some kind of way. So reframing unhelpful thoughts is very similar to just looking at the same situation, but from a different perspective. It's almost like putting on another pair of glasses where you see it differently. You see possibilities that you haven't seen before. You're open-minded. So this is a method, so it's some strategy, and I'd love it if you guys would maybe write some of these down. So teachers, if you would pause this, maybe allow people to have time to take notes. So these are some examples of reframing questions. You can ask yourself, am I assuming something bad will happen? A lot of us have that automatic negative thought. I call them ants. It's like, it's where you just think the worst thing is going to happen and your brain just goes there, which it may not even happen, but we just think the worst. We just automatically go there. Another way to reframe is, am I assuming the other person was being intentionally mean? A lot of times, guys, honestly, when a situation happens, that person may not even be thinking about you or talking about you. Or maybe that was just simply a misunderstanding. And then the last one is, what can I learn from this situation? And sometimes that's actually the best way to reframe a situation. is to ask yourself, what can I learn from this? Because you're always looking at it as a growth mindset, a way to improve, a way to grow. And face it, that's what middle school is all about. So we're going to give you an opportunity to go through this method and see if you can start getting this and start practicing this. So here's the situation. You have a science test. And I don't know about you, but this has happened to me before. The science test. You studied really hard. You studied really hard for this science test, but you got a much lower grade than you expected. I don't know. Like I said, that happens. So your first negative thought, or your automatic negative thought, could be, I'll never be good at science. If you have that perspective, how do you think you're going to approach the next test if you have that perspective? What about this one? That test was totally confusing. You're completely blaming the test. And the last one is, look at this one. This is how you're judging the teacher. You're putting your frustrations upon a teacher, and you're saying the teacher was unfair. Well, let's look about how that we could possibly reframe this. And again, these are unhelpful thoughts. This does not benefit you in any way. This does not help you to get along with your teacher better. This does not help you to maybe study differently. And if this is how you think, it's going to be a cycle. And that cycle is going to lead you not to study, not to spend your time wisely, not to do what you need to do in order to understand the material, and not to grow. All right, so now we're going to look at reframing this activity. So on your own, I want you to write out some possible responses. Describe, and in your description, I want you to describe the possible emotions that could come from the scenario with a science test. How might you feel? What are some possible emotions? And then write down 2 unhelpful thoughts. And then reframe your unhelpful thoughts into helpful thoughts. So pause the video, and I'm going to give you a minute or so to do that. Okay, welcome back. And I hope we heard from the remote students as well as the face-to-face students. So let's look at this flow chart. So the situation, you studied really hard for a science test, but got a much lower grade than you expected. Some of those emotions you would put here, I would say sadness, frustration. What are some unhelpful thoughts that you could have? You may think, I'm just stupid. I can't do this. I can't get this. It doesn't matter how hard I try. I never can get this. I'm just dumb. And then what's a helpful thought? And that would be a way to reframe your unhelpful thought into helpful thoughts. And you know what? And that simply might be, you know what? I am a tactile learner. I have to learn by doing. So I'm going to start rewriting my notes, because I think if I rewrite my notes and almost make it like a test, I think I might be able to do better next time. So what helpful thoughts did you come up with? And let's see if any of this is here. Remember, we're reframing, which is reframing. And this was a great visual of how you can reframe. And we're just changing our perspective. We're putting on a different pair of glasses. So let's see what we got here. So instead of thinking, I can't get this, he thinks, I can get better at science. That's a growth mindset. I can get better. Here we go. Maybe I need a different way of studying. Again, that's that learning style. That's one of them we talked about. Maybe it's time management. Maybe it's starting to spend more time on those more important priorities, spending time studying for those tests, especially since they carry a lot of weight. And here, let's see if this would help you in your relationship with your teacher. The teacher was just trying to see how much we knew. You reframe that thought to that teacher is so unfair to, you know what, they just wanted to see how much we knew. And guys, honestly, that's what teachers want to do. That's the reason why we want to have tests. We want to make sure that you understand the material and how we need to reframe the material to maybe help you to understand. Because the bottom line is We want you to understand the material so you have enough knowledge so you can be successful later in life. So I'm wrapping up. So look at these 3 reframing questions we discussed earlier. Which one do you think you might use the most often and why? So you might want to take a second and ask and write these questions down. And what question of your own you might ask to help reframe your unhelpful thoughts to helpful thoughts? What are some ways that you can reframe? Because I'm sure you can come up with something much better than what we've discussed because they're yours and you own it. Okay, so make sure you read these questions. And here are the possible ways to reframe. When you're having an unhelpful thought, ask yourself, am I assuming something bad will happen? That's that just that automatic negative thought that it just goes to the worst. Am I assuming the other person wasn't being intentionally mean? How many times do we do that? That people are just mean, they're just hurtful. And what about this last one? What can I learn from this situation? And that's definitely a growth mindset. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson today. And I really hope that you guys are starting to put into place these techniques and methods that you're being taught, because I promise you they can be very life-changing. So have a great day and see you on Thursday.